Hello and welcome to En Route, Journeys in Faith and Modern Life. Happy New Year. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Welcome. This is the podcast where we will explore the who, where, why, what, and how of religion and its intersection with other topics. This is episode 68. I think that some of the best takes on mainline Protestantism come from people who have come to mainline Protestantism just recently from evangelical backgrounds. I think they're able to see things about the church that people who have long been on the inside just can't see. And today, we are talking to one of those people, Loren Richmond Jr. He is a pastor in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, which is my own denomination. And a few months ago, he wrote an article on his substack called Yoyos and Mainline Churches. In this episode, we are using a little bit of physics to talk about how churches balance responding to members, maintaining the institution, and how they reach out beyond the walls of the church. Loren says the following here in his article, and I wanted for you to hear this. Today, I can't help but notice centripetal forces overtaking so many mainline churches as traditions, norms, institutions, status quo, etc., sort of act to essentially pull the yo-yo back in closer. Denominations almost cannibalize themselves in a way as they devote more and more resources, and he says people are a resource, into maintaining the institution as opposed to investing into being willing to sort of let go and see where centrifugal force takes us. So the question is, how can mainline churches let go? Why don't we find out? Let's listen to Loren Richmond Jr. Well, Loren, it is nice to finally get to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for being flexible, making this work.
Not a problem. We all have busy lives these days. I think the first thing I wanted to kind of get from you is knowing a little bit about you, and then ultimately also your journey kind of from evangelicalism into mainline Christianity, and especially into the Disciples of Christ.
Yeah. Well, I jokingly refer to myself as a suburban white dad, about as white as you can get, cargo pants, cargo shorts included. I have 2 young kids. I'm married. We live in the burbs northeast of Denver, kind of Denver Metro, northeast Denver Metro. More professionally, I'd say I'm a pastor, podcaster, and social entrepreneur. Grew up independent Baptist, kind of had a deconstruction before that was the thing to do. That was about 15-ish years ago. Found my way through some folks. Shout out to Phil Snyder, who's still the Disciples pastor in Springfield, Missouri, and Emily Bowen Marler, I think it is now. I was introduced to Disciples there through actually a professor at the state school, Missouri State. I was going to do religious studies graduate school program. And then eventually I found my way to Phillips Seminary in Tulsa. I got ordained and have been fortunate to be working in a few different church settings over the years. Currently, I am doing a hospital CPE residency, chaplaincy residency, and looking to get back into church world when and how that's appropriate in a more bigger ministry setting. And
you also spent some time at what what's been called mission gathering, which maybe I'll let you explain, but you're in the branch that's in the Denver area.
Yeah. So now it's been probably 4 years. I still am, but was then and still am passionate about new churches, revitalizing churches, and finding new ways to connect what I believe is, especially the disciples of Christ, I believe we have a great message. Trying to figure out how to get that message to people in a maybe a newer way. And I connected with some folks at Mission Gathering, and we were able to work with the region to start a church. Unfortunately, due to various things, didn't make it through COVID. And that was definitely rough. That's been, as we're recording this, about 7-8 months ago. That shut down. But it was I loved the work. Would love to do it again. So.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, I think that this has been, the whole COVID thing has always been a rough thing for churches, especially, I mean, for those that aren't able to continue ministry, and even those that do, nothing is the same right now. And it's been a growing experience. Yeah,
I mean, certainly nothing's guaranteed in new church. And I wouldn't say like COVID ruined things for my church by any stretch. You know, no, I didn't take anything for granted, I guess. I just say, it's hard to grow and attract new people, when you're, doing video only, because I really came into it, COVID, with a really opportunistic mindset, like, hey, this is going to be an opportunity for us to reach new people. The playing field has been leveled, but quickly it really became obvious, like, bigger churches with lots of resources are just going to come in and, dominate the market, so to speak. And that's a lot of what happened. And then you also saw folks who had long ties to churches kind of get back into church, or, it's just really this kind of weird sorting that happened. But for newer churches that didn't have a lot of connections beyond my own community that I'd built, it was really hard to grow. And I remember the first summer, like during COVID, like I would engage with new people, but it was really just hard because there's no real way to like tie people in beyond just like, hey, come watch our Zoom or whatever, our live stream on Sunday morning. And that's kind of not fun. So it is what it is.
Yeah. It's interesting. There have been a lot of people that have seen, the live stream and all of that. And I think that that's all important, and everything, but I think that there's a dimension that's missing if you don't have that kind of in-person thing going on. And of course, granted, it's hard to do that in the midst of a pandemic, but I think it's just hard. It's just what I think I learned is that Zoom, it can work in a pinch, but it's just hard to do that over the long haul.
Yeah. So
one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you is that I read an article you wrote on your Substack a few months ago that's entitled Yoyos and Mainline Churches. And you kind of brought also a little bit of physics into it. And you talk about how basically coming in as an outsider into the tradition, how you saw that maybe at some point churches and denominations were more centrifugal, kind of outward focused, and now they're centripetal, which is inward. Could you go kind of about explaining what you meant by that, and what did you notice, and how can things change?
Yeah, well, I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the matter, and truth be told, I heard this analogy on a evangelical podcast, and I, not in the context of mainline churches, but just kind of in general, I thought, oh, really, this really resonates, I think. So I'll preface this by saying I'm not a scientist, and this is my take on this. But as I understand it, and I always forget, centrifugal, if I remember correctly, is the force that's pulling inward, and I always forget how to say it. Centripetal? I'm saying it wrong.
Well, I should say centripetal is inward, and I remember that because if you trip, you're kind of going in, and then centrifugal is always going to be then the opposite of that, so it's outward.
That's right. Thank you. So whatever the words are, there's the analogy was spinning a yo-yo, and how the forces pulling outward, the string keeps the yo-yo from just flying out. So there's that force, that centripetal, right, pulling outward force, but the string is the fugal force that's keeping it in. And I think there's obviously pluses and minuses to both sides of this if you think about it in the church context. I think community, organizations, institutions, there needs to be some level of togetherness, some level of cohesion that keeps things together, or else things just kind of fly apart. I think, I think back, this was probably 10 years ago, right? The Occupy Wall Street movement, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think when we saw that, I imagine you follow that too. I think when that came about, I think a lot of people thought, oh, this is going to be a movement. This is going to be a thing. And it really just kind of fell apart. There wasn't enough kind of inward thing holding it together. Now, conversely, I think we might say from a more critical matter perspective, I think a lot of the energy or focus in right-wing politics is all like, we got to hold this thing together,
Mm-hmm.
Like we got to keep the outsiders out. So there's plus minuses to both sides. One thing that I'll just say, and hopefully folks don't find this too troubling, I don't ever want to hear again from anyone who's disciple of Christ at any kind of disciple of Christ gathering how long you've been a disciple or what generation disciple you are. It's just, I don't care. It doesn't matter. No one who's new to the disciples cares. No one who's outside of the disciples cares that you're second or third or fourth generation disciple. We don't care. It doesn't matter. That's just an example of that inward pull, and it doesn't matter. Plus, it's just super like insider language. It's everything that's anti-community, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my soapbox. I'll stay on that. So I think the challenge is finding the balance between outward focus and going outward, but also having enough cohesion and inward pull, so that the whole thing doesn't just fly apart.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think that we've been more focused on kind of that inward pull as opposed to outward? And I've seen that in my own ministry, and kind of whenever you see people who are interested in, or if you express interest in that we have to do things outwardly, they always want to know, well, why aren't we doing things for the church?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I used to hear that a lot in one of the churches I led. I think I don't necessarily think it's wrong if you're going to be a church just says, hey, we're just going to care about only ourselves. I mean, I don't believe that's the mission of the church, but if that's who you want to be and you own that and you live that out, I guess that's fine. I think the challenge is, as I see it at least, is when churches say, hey, we want to grow, we want to impact our community, but then they don't want to do anything differently about it. I think the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is just change.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm going to throw out an evangelical name here, but Ed Stetzer,
mm-hmm.
he spends a lot of time banging on mainliners. And I'd love to have him on my pod just to like give them grief about that, because I think the reality is we see churches struggling to adapt irregardless of their theological positions or convictions, and struggling to adapt to meet the changing needs of their community. And they just kind of realize, like, hey, we don't really want to change. We want to keep this thing. And I think that's the thing that as communities see change around them, they kind of like pull closer and they pull tighter, and those centrifugal forces just kind of pull inward and inward. Here's my guest son here.
Dad, can you help me? Please?
Go ahead.
That's okay. You were talking a little bit about the kind of wanting that inward pull and that sense of community.
Dad, can I have these?
Yeah.
And so is that a sense of comfort for them, or?
I mean, I think inherently, like, we all don't like change.
Mm-hmm.
I think anybody who's like, oh, I really like change, probably has some issues, mental health issues. They probably need to work through why they're constantly wanting change is probably like a coping mechanism. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. That's just my hunch. So I think, inherently humans don't like change. We like consistency. And I think that's part of it.
So do you think that what are some methods or things that churches and denominations can do to try to
better, right?
Mm-hmm.
to try to keep that balance between being drawn in and drawn out?
Yeah, I really think like outsider perspectives matter here, and that's kind of why I made that little soapbox about saying what kind of generation disciple you are, because that's super insider language. And I think the challenge for many churches, many institutions, organizations, is when it becomes so insider focused and they don't have any outsider perspective. They don't see how they just don't see the ways. It's just like it's like a fish out of like a fish in water. They don't recognize, like, oh my goodness, I'm swimming in water here. And to an outsider who comes in and is just totally off put by the language or the style or the traditions. So really trying to find outsiders who can give you some perspective on what's going on in the community and what's important to the folks in your neighborhood.
Where do you see the future for the Mainline, especially in dealing with centripetal and centrifugal, and how can do you see some leaders that are doing some things like that?
Dad.
Yeah, my little guest here wants to be part of this episode. I think there's some really good leaders in the Mainline world. The one I still will always have a spot in my heart for Phil Snyder and Emily. I think there's a lot of, on my podcast, I interview a lot of folks who I think are doing great work. Mm-hmm. Someone you've had, Dwight Shiley, is one I think about. Mm-hmm. I'm just kind of looking at my stack of books. There's a Methodist pastor around here, Mark Feldmeyer, who I think is doing great work. Mark Elsdon, he's a Peace USA pastor, and you should have him on.
Yeah.
He's doing a lot of work on nonprofits and being strategic with assets and resources for the church. So, there's a lot of good leaders, I think, that are really doing a lot of hard work. I think, and this is, again, a kind of a hot take of mine, is I think one of the challenges, and I think it might get to this metaphor we're using of centrifugal versus centrifugal. Yeah, thank you. is I think the structures and systems in mainline church are often built in to keep leaders contained, restrained, limited. I say it this way, and I still feel very fondly of my seminary education, but I feel like I was trained not to be a leader in seminary. And I think that's, to me, that's a problem.
Can you unpack that? Because I think you're onto something there, or something that I felt, but I'm curious what you mean by that.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is my opinion. So again, folks might disagree with me, and that's fine. But I think, in my perspective, I think congregationalism in this kind of like everyone he gets an equal vote, an equal voice. I think that's risk avoidant, and that's more about not wanting to offend anyone rather than being bold and following the call of God. And I believe that different people have been differently equipped by the Spirit to lead and serve in different ways. And when people have been clearly given the gift of leadership, and you're just like, hey, your voice, your vision, your opinions is equally as valid, or is on the same par as some random person, not to diminish the giftings and what's the word I'm looking for? Spirit of God in each person. I can't think of what a word I'm looking for. Not to diminish that, but I think we all have different giftings and tools that God has given us to lead and serve in different ways. It's like if someone who is very good at playing the guitar or the piano, and the obvious thing would be, hey, can you help in worship, leading, playing piano, guitar? And instead you're like, hey, can you like shovel snow for us? Like, yeah, like this guy can, or person can shovel snow, but that's not really what they're best equipped and gifted to do. So I think and I kind of, I'm a big student of family systems theory, and I think a lot of it is often like we want to avoid conflict, we want to avoid upsetting people. So what we can do is we can just say, hey, let's throw it out to everybody and ask their opinion. But really often what happens is nothing happens. And then, or conversely, the most anxious person in the room just hijacks things, and it kind of goes backwards. And we say, oh, we don't have a leader, but really there is a leader. It's the most anxious, change-resistant person who's often the leader. And I joke about this, Dennis. I laugh about this. When I was doing the mission gathering, I took a couple people through the commissioning ministry process, and one of my guys came back to me and he's like, did you know it took 6 years to I can't say it, it's so funny. The whole becoming a denomination took us disciples 6 years. I mean, 6 years, for goodness sake. That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Some people probably like a part of that committee and then like didn't live to see the end.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that the thing that resonated with me when you said that is that I think from seminary, and I don't know if it was really from seminary. I think the seminary was actually at Luther was pretty good about leadership, but it was more what I picked up once I became a pastor, and it was a sense of you have to have the congregation really be the one making decisions. Mm-hmm. And there's one case early on at my current call, the congregation didn't have a musician. They used taped music. And I don't like that. And especially having a husband who is a musician, this is not going to fly. So I said, can we consider hiring a musician? And initially they said no. Mm-hmm. And it was probably not a the best thing to do, but I kind of went ahead anyway and found someone. And, people, I think, appreciated that. But I was actually counseled at some point that they have to come up to that decision. And so, which would have meant for several, I don't know, we probably could have still been using tape music to this day. And, you don't want to end up being the person that, is a power hungry person. Right. And I think we've talked earlier about the whole kind of Mars Hill thing, and you don't want that. But this is also bad when you don't really, when you basically tell pastors that they're not leaders, that that they're kind of helpers or something, but not really throwing out leadership, because in some ways that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name right now, and I'm pretty sure it was a guy. So forgive me, whoever you are. I think he was Disciples of Christ pastor, and he talked about they did a constitution and bylaws change, and he made the point of saying, like, I'm not going to be, and this was his words, and I thought they were brilliant, an institutional chaplain, because I think that's a lot of what is expected of clergy in mainline churches.
Yeah, it is.
And maybe I think that could have been the thing 50, 70 years ago. But today, I don't think that's what's needed. And again, to your point, a leader, a pastor needs to really have some strategic wisdom. Like you said, you don't need to be blowing up everything the first 6 months. You'll see that a lot where a pastor will change everything, get fired, and then be like, oh, the church couldn't handle my change. It's like, well, you need to have some strategic wisdom there about not changing everything right away. But I mean, I think I won't say her name, but my good friend talks about I think if I can get it right, she'll say something like, asking a church to choose their own pastors, like asking preschoolers to choose their own teacher, something like that. So that's a bit, I won't say her name because of that. So it's a bit harsh, but I think there's some element of truth here,
to that. Yeah, I think there is some truth to that. And I think you're right. This is not to denigrate chaplaincy, and I know that you're doing that right now.
Literally what I'm doing right now.
But it's also something that bugs me, because I think has become kind of, I feel at times that's kind of the desire of what we want are our chaplains. And I think chaplains are necessary. So I don't want to say that they aren't. But I think that they are necessary in certain contexts.
Right.
In a hospital, in a nursing home, there are other places where I think police chaplains, fire, those are places where people's lives are kind of topsy-turvy. They need someone that can come in and kind of bring some comfort, yes, but also just kind of spiritual direction in those times.
And maybe that's it, Dennis. Sorry to cut you off, but I'm just thinking like I said, like you said, I'm currently working as a hospital chaplain, like we talked about. Like the hospital's not going anywhere. Like there's the doctors, the insurance companies, the corporation, like they're running the show. The hospital's not going anywhere. Like 70 years ago, like mainline churches were almost as efficient as they were almost that level of efficiency as organizations. Like they were starting the hospitals and whatever. So maybe it could work that you just need chaplains to come and provide some level of spiritual acute care. But the thing that I think I struggle with in hospital chaplaincy is this kind of like the whole like fishing people out of the river. It's like, what I'm grateful to be helping fishing people out of the river, but I want to like stop them from getting thrown in the river or figure out why they're getting in the river, kind of drowning in the first place. And I think this is what a lot of mainline clergy struggle with, the similar thing. Like they feel like they're constantly just doing rescue work of like solving crises rather than being able to say like, hey, let's stop these crises from happening from the beginning. Let's change the system. And they're not empowered to do so, in my opinion.
So how do you change that situation, especially in seminaries? Because I think you said that that's where you picked up that pastors can't be leaders. That to me says that there's something wrong with seminary education if that the message that's being told to you.
I mean, I'll just be blunt and say I love seminary, value my seminary education. Shout out to Phillips Theological Seminary. I still love you guys, y'all. I think there's a lot that could change. But we don't have time for talk about all the things that could change. You know, a silly, I don't know if I want to go there, but I'll just say, like, I think, I think systems and structures, just some basic leadership training would really be helpful. And again, maybe I'm being too harsh, too critical. I don't know. It's been a few years since I've been in seminary. But I do think encouraging folks to be leaders. And again, we want to be realistic and responsible. Like you said, we don't want to go into this Mars Hill approach where it's, we're kind of reveling of people getting run over by the bus. If folks understand that metaphor, I mean, I'm not afraid of that metaphor of general of saying, like, hey, this is the bus. This is where we're going. You can get in, or if you don't want to be part of the bus, that's fine. Now, running people over, that's a whole nother level, I think. But I think the bus metaphor kind of gets to that centrifugal kind of metaphor is like, if there's nothing holding it together, like it's just going to be a bunch of parts, a bunch of automobile parts kind of like just strewn over the street. So there needs to be something holding it together. And I think ideally some kind of direction. So it's not just swerving all over down the road. But that being said, you don't need to be running people over and should never be celebrating, folks for whom they're not able to be a part of it for whatever reason.
So kind of getting back to kind of where you're at, you are actually doing CPE training. Where do you see that going? And how do you see that kind of where your observation about centripetal can it filter into your work as a chaplain?
Well, I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but this is where I'm going to go with it.
Go right ahead.
I saw like a few months ago someone on Twitter saying like that chaplaincy is like a good strategy for clergy to think about income streams, and I would just be very careful. It's not like a gold. There's no gold at the end of the rainbow. It's good work, and maybe I'm again feeling a little afraid because we're in the middle of a pandemic. In a super, 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 super high part of the pandemic. So I'm feeling probably a little bit frayed at the edges there. But I think, I don't know what other CP contexts, like I don't not get paid a lot of money. It's very demanding work. And even at the end of it, like I'm going to be like competing for like part-time on-call night jobs, so it's not like some guaranteed income stream for pastors to go like make a nice side hustle. It's good work. It's meaningful work. I appreciate the work. But I wouldn't say, hey, this is your ticket, clergy, if you just finished seminary and you're looking for a job. I think there's a lot of important work that happens in CP that I'm grateful for my own self-growth. And I think I'm hoping to really apply the tools that I'm learning of to churches. Like the biggest thing that I would love to do, Dennis, is to start a program of what's the word? I'm blanking on the word now. Advanced directives for churches. In my hospital, we talk to every patient we can about whether they have advanced directives. So do not resuscitate, living will, and medical durable power of attorney. The reality is churches are living organisms that are going to die at some point. And you probably see it just as much as I do, where churches will go on and on and on and just use up every resource and just die an awful death. We see it in the hospital where we see patients who really have no chance, to be frank, and usually it's a family member who's unafraid to let go, to move to comfort measures. They just go to these extreme measures that really have no useful effect. And again, I don't want to diminish the value of human life. Don't hear that, folks. What I'm saying is, for many people, and I think for many churches, they do much better if they could die a meaningful death. And for a church, I think that might look like saying, hey, we've got 10 people, we've got 20 people, we've got 30 people, but we have no interest. Let's be frank, we have no interest in changing to meet the needs of our community. Rather than spending this $500,000 endowment just on us, rather than spending this $1 million endowment just on us, just draining the bank account, how could we live out our values in closing down this church? So that might mean we're going to go set aside some money for a new church. That might mean we're going to set aside some money for a nonprofit we really care about. We're going to establish another endowment to serve a community. There's many things that churches could do if they're intentional about it, to die with dignity, to use those words. And I just hate seeing churches just dwindle down to where they have no money, no people, and then they're like, well, I guess we're going to close. And maybe that's okay in some certain circumstances. I don't know, but I think there's better ways to do it. At least that's my thoughts.
Okay. Well, I know that you have a hard out, so I want to really respect that. But I'd also love to have you back on the podcast. I think that there's a whole bunch of, it sounded like you had a whole bunch more you would want to share, and we're time limited. So I do hope to have you back, and this was really cool to chat with you.
Yeah, Dennis, thanks for having me. I hope we get a chance to talk more in the future. I think we have similar passions about how can we, I think it sounds like, I think my passion, and I feel like this is yours too, is like, I love this. Like we have good stuff here. Like I want to see what our stuff, how can we get that stuff to more people? Because I believe it's important and can make a difference in folks' lives.
I agree. All right. So
I feel like we need like a rah mainline disciples church cheer now.
If I knew how to do cheers, I would do it, but I am not going to. Yes, let's just say go team. So, but thank you, and we will.
Yeah, thanks.
Again soon.
Okay.
Right. Bye. So I hope you really enjoyed that interview with Loren. I am so thankful that he was able to take the time to chat. I hope that you understood a little bit. There was an interruption there with one of his children. That happens with podcasts and with children. As I said, I really enjoyed time with Loren, and I'm pretty sure that we will be talking more again in the very near future. So a few housekeeping notes. Please, if you have not subscribed to this podcast, please do so. You can do so on whatever podcast form that you are listening to. Also, if you have some time, don't be an anonymous listener. I would love if you would please leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or any other platform that allows for that. There is actually a link where you can leave a review. It makes it very easy to leave a review. It's in the show notes. I hope that you will take that, and it will help you to choose where you want that review to go, what platform. when you do that, when you leave a review, it makes it easier for people to see this podcast. It's kind of that thing, those weird things with the algorithms, that it makes it available. That the more people who leave reviews makes it a lot easier for people to find the podcast and get to hear this podcast. So, also, just to remind you that En route does have a YouTube channel. There is a link again in the show notes. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, this is your chance. Click the link in the description, and then subscribe. And also, make sure to visit our website at enroutepodcast.org. That is it for this episode of En route, which is on En route, the journey of faith and modern life. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Take care, Godspeed, and see you soon.